what I'm going to do is try to introduce to you a foundational understanding of the trauma releasing process that I've developed, how it came about, and what its benefit and its value is. Essentially, what happened was I was living in Africa and the Middle East, and I was living in a number of countries where I was experiencing war. So I was having very strong experiences within myself, but also watching thousands of traumatized people. And the question kept coming up, what happens to all these people that are traumatized? What happens to our bodies? And is there any way to get out of that process? Can we somehow recover? Because here in this country, the only way I knew to recover was that you had to go to therapy for a number of years and you had to have a private practitioner, etc. But in those countries that wasn't available. And so it really meant that people were left never to be able to recover. And that paradigm was wrong for me. And so when I was in the Middle East and I was in Africa, when I was able to break the paradigm and say that's no longer the possibility here, a new paradigm was able to give birth to itself. And the new paradigm happened from two experiences that I had. One when I was living in Lebanon, and this was many years ago when it was under very severe fighting, and I was in a large building similar to this, and we were in the basement. There were 8 of us in the building, and we were sitting on the floor, just sitting like you normally would, leaning with your back against the wall. We were sitting there, and the building was being bombed by mortar shells. Now, mortar shells don't go through the whole building, they just destroy one room. So we were in the basement, and we knew that we were fairly safe from that, but when the mortar shell hit the building, it made this tremendous sound, and it was terrifying. So what happened was that as we were sitting along the floor, and every time a mortar shell would hit the building, we'd go like this. And then we'd go like that again. And we did that every single time a shell would hit the building. I had seen this 1,000 times. This was the first time I really saw it. And what I saw was that of the 8 of us that were in this building, we were from 6 different countries. And every one of us made exactly the same movement, exactly the same way, at exactly the same time. And it was like it had been choreographed or we had been trained to do this. And yet I knew that wasn't the case. And it was the first time it dawned on me that the human body is doing something absolutely identical, despite our cultural differences, language differences, historical differences. Every time a mortar shell would hit the building, we'd make exactly the same movement. And it was the first time that I realized, my goodness, humans are made the same. And we actually respond to traumatic events in the same way. And so I began to question, what is the way we respond to traumatic events? And the way I eventually discovered was that when we are traumatized, whether it's a psychological, emotional, or physical threat to ourselves, we actually begin to pull the body forward. And the way I discovered it in terms of psychological or emotional is it's very easy. Take a child and berate them or demean them, and you'll watch that child do this. And they actually begin the same slumping forward that we were doing, only more rapidly, when a bomb was hitting. And so I realized that what happens to the human organism is that when it is under threat, psychological, emotional, or physical, its safest position ever is to actually roll up into a fetal position. That's the safest position, and you can see that in children when they go to their bedroom and they cry and they're feeling threatened. They'll actually roll into a little ball, they'll curl up like that, and you can find that from adults or anybody. If you're in some situation that's life-threatening, you go this way. You don't go this way, okay? You pull forward. Well, that immediately helped me recognize there are anterior muscles that are called flexor muscles that actually flex this body forward. You can do the same thing with a child. If you took that child and you complimented that child and you told them how good they were, that child will go like this and come back to life. Just like that. Their head will come up, their chest will open up, their breath will get deeper, and they actually have energy in their face. And you can tell that from children. That's when it dawned on me that this is defense and protection in the human body, and this is expansion and safety. All you have to do is bring ourselves back to safety. So the question for me was, and the thousands of people I was living with, if we were doing this over and over and over, were we actually training the body to live in this defensive position? which when I came back to this country, I discovered was true because I still kept repeating my post-trauma reactions because my body actually was still in a state of defense and protection. And it wasn't until I was able to get the body to relax, bring my head up, that I could take a deep breath and I would stop repeating post-traumatic stress behavior patterns. So once I figured that out, I went back to Africa again. I went to another country that was at war. And I had the experience of being in a place where we were receiving aerial bombs. And the aerial bombs are absolutely terrifying. And so in this village I was in, what the job of the adults was to grab children as soon as we heard the planes. We'd grab children and we'd run them all to the bomb shelters. And when we'd get to the bomb shelters, they were benches. And the adults would sit on the benches and then we would put the children on our laps. And so I had 2 children, about 2 years old, on my lap, and the bombs were getting really close and they were getting absolutely terrified. And in their terror, they were actually tremoring. Just like we see people tremor like after a car accident, even if it isn't severe, you might get scared and you feel yourself tremoring all over your body. A dog tremors in a thunderstorm. You could be standing at the altar getting married and very happy about it, but your hand's tremoring or your leg's going like this and you're trying to stop the twitching. And what's the first thing we'll do? We'll say, let me take a drink. It will calm down my nerves. And basically it's true. You put alcohol in the system and you anesthetize the nervous system. The very nervous system that you needed because it was tremoring, because it was already calming you down. The tremors are an organic response to the body being overexcited. That's all it is. That's why you can tremor when you are excited about happy things, or you can say, I was so angry, I was shaking, I couldn't control myself. I was shaking like a leaf. My knees were knocking, my jaw or my teeth were chattering. We have all these phrases in our culture that tell us we tremor organically. It's a natural mechanism in the body. And its only purpose is that when our stress level goes above where it should, the body starts to tremor to actually restore homeostasis. The tremor is actually the calming down of the body. And we have identified it as a pathological expression of the body. We've also socialized it as a weak expression of the body. So that if my boss is yelling at me and I don't want him or her to know that I'm being affected, I'll freeze my body, in fact stiffen it, so that they don't see my hand shaking or my leg shaking, or they don't hear my voice quiver. All of that is a sign of weakness, so that my boss would know I'm more vulnerable. And so what we do is we freeze that mechanism. What I discovered was that if we froze it, it automatically meant it was still in us and it was still able to be operative. I just had to figure out the way to get it to happen because I can't cognitively tell you to tremor. You can't do it because you're using a certain part of the brain when you're being led through something. So I studied animal research, and what I discovered was that in animals, when animals have traumatic events, they actually tremor organically. And after the tremoring response, they actually go back and restore their homeostasis, and they go back on with life. And mammals don't experience post-traumatic stress disorder. The gazelle doesn't live in fear of the tiger that chased it the day before unless it smells it again. But it doesn't live in the terror that, oh my God, any day that tiger's going to come back and get me. We do that. We live with that because we have a different part of the brain. So when I studied the brain, I realized that there are 3 basic parts to the brain. You have the brain stem, and the brain stem is the most primitive part of the brain, and that's the part of the brain that actually regulates things like heart rate, blood pressure, respiration. So that when we're little infants and we're holding the child in our arms, it's really just basically breathing and kind of surviving, because the brain stem is the most active part of that child's brain. They don't have the other parts of the brain developed yet. And they're very easy to startle, because all you have to do is go like that, and the child will jump. And that's because the brainstem is, in fact, the part of the brain that causes us to have that reaction like that. So children are very somatic-oriented. Infants are very somatic-oriented. And so all you have to do is make a loud noise, and they'll startle immediately. That's the part of the brain that we as adults have got to try to access to actually get ourselves to tremor, because that's where the tremoring response comes from. Later on, we'll develop what's called the limbic system in the brain, and that's in the middle of the brain. And in the limbic system, we have basic human emotions. There are fight or flight emotions: rage, anger, hurt, fear, terror, those things. And so as we get a little bit older, we actually have the startle response and then some sort of anger that comes after that, or some sort of expression of fight, flight, freeze, whatever. Later on, we actually develop what's called the cortex and the neocortex, and that's the uniquely human part of the brain. That human part of the brain is where we end up reflecting back and saying, let me tell you what happened to me. And so we recount the story of the traumatic event that happened. So we have three parts of the brain: the brainstem, the limbic system, and the cortex. What we do in counseling is we try to address the cortex. I have you tell me the story. If you tell me the story and you have access to it, you'll go down into the limbic system of the brain where you actually have the emotional release. But you won't always get down into the brainstem where you actually have the physical discharge that you should have had at the time of the traumatic event. So if you're only going from the cortex to the limbic system, you can end up getting stuck by going back and forth between those two and never fully completing the discharge, which needs to occur from the nervous system, which is activated by the brainstem. That leads us to the tremor exercise. I'm going to actually lead you through a series of exercises. Now I'm going to consciously lead you through those exercises, and that's going to be the cortex part of your brain. You're going to listen to me and follow the directions, hopefully, and you're going to start to move in there. But what we're going to do that's unique is that as you move further into the exercises, we're actually going to stress the muscle tissues so that they actually begin this very fine vibration inside. And that fine vibration is the beginning of the tremoring response of the muscles. And there are certain mechanisms in the muscle that create that tremoring mechanism. Those mechanisms in those specific sets of muscles are associated with brainstem behavior. That's why every human being can make exactly the same movement of this, because that muscle pattern is embedded in the brain or trained in the brain and the brainstem, that when you're in danger, make a very specific movement. And here's the muscles you need to move. So we're going to exercise those specific sets of muscles. And what we will do as a result of that is, instead of being able to access your brain stem by me talking to you about it, I'm going to help you access brain stem activity by actually activating the mechanisms in the muscle tissue, and they will send the signal back to the brain stem, and you'll have this bodily release of tremors. In that process, you can oftentimes experience an emotional discharge. So now you've gone from the brainstem, where you have the physical reaction of the tremoring. They lead you into the limbic system, which is the middle part of the brain where the trauma emotions are. And then after that, you can actually tell me the story of what it felt like. So we're actually going back to try to release the traumatic experience in the same way that it was produced inside the brain. Okay, does that make sense to people? All right, so that's what we're going to do, and we're going to stop here, and I'm going to actually lead you through these exercises. Okay? So for the first exercise, what I want you to do is spread your feet a little bit wider apart than your shoulders. And what we're going to do is you're going to sway over, moving your hips over to one side so that you actually are turned up on your ankles, and you're on the outside of one foot and on the inside of another foot. And in that position, I want you to take a nice deep breath and let go into your legs. Then you're going to roll over to the other side. Turn up on the other side of your feet. You're on the outside of one foot and on the inside of another foot. Nice twist in the ankles. Take a deep breath and let go and relax into your feet. Then roll back in the other direction, moving your hips so that they go over top of each foot. Nice deep breath. Relax and go into your legs. Roll back over to the other side. Take another nice deep breath. Let yourself relax. Start to feel your body go into your legs. And one last time, you're going to roll over to the other side. Take a nice deep breath. Sink down into your feet and your legs. Relax. Then you're going to come back into your standing position and shake both of your legs out. Nice relaxed shake. Great. Now, for those of you who can, what you're going to do is pick up one foot and hold it in your hand. If you have difficulty picking up your foot and holding it in your hand, what you can do is let the foot rest on the floor behind you. And then all you're going to do is keep all your weight on your standing leg. And from that position, what you're going to do is simply come up onto your toes and come back down. And then come up onto your toes and come back down. And you're going to repeat this about 10 times. Come back down. Take a nice breath. You want to make sure that you come all the ways back down onto your heel when you're doing the exercise. Do it 2 more times. And when you're finished with the exercise, let your foot down and shake out the leg that you just exercised. Give it a nice big shake. Let the muscles relax. Now turn around, put your other hand on the wall. You're going to hold up the other foot that you've just exercised. And if you can't do that, you let that foot rest behind you on the floor. Then you're going to come up onto your toes and back down. And come up onto your toes and back down. And up onto your toes and back down. Come up and go down. Take a nice deep breath. Keep relaxing into the exercise. Up and down. Up onto your toes and back down. Nice and relaxed. Make sure you stay in your bodies. Come up onto your toes and down. And one more time. Come up onto your toes and come back down. Then let your foot go down to the floor and shake out the leg that you just exercised. A nice vigorous shake. Get it to relax again. Then come back into a standing position. Take a nice breath, and you've just completed exercise 2. For this next exercise, what we want to do is we want to exercise all of the muscle groups in one leg at one time. And the way we're going to do that is we're actually going to put all the weight on one leg, and we're going to now start bending at the knee instead of the ankle. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to come down and touch the ground. You're going to put your hands on the ground, and you're actually going to lift up one leg and bend and straighten at your standing knee. Keep your foot flat on the ground and bend and straighten at your standing knee. What you want to do is make sure that your hands are not too far away from your feet because the pressure is going into your hands. Bring your hands back closer to your foot, and that way all the weight is going on one leg. And you keep bending and straightening that leg until you fatigue it. If you're not able to go down to the ground because you have some physical restrictions, you can do the same exercise by simply resting one leg behind you and bending and straightening at the standing knee. And you only bend and straighten as far as you comfortably can do so. You don't have to push your body or create any pain. This is exactly the opposite. You only go up to the limitations of your body. So if this is what you can do, this is absolutely fine, and it works just as well as bending and straightening by being on the floor. Again, what you want to do is some nice breathing, bend and straighten in a relaxed manner, and when you fatigue the leg, or when you begin to feel some pain in the leg, I want you to simply stop the exercise. So you do it 2 more times, and then you finish the exercise by coming up into a standing position and shake out that leg that you just exercised. Shake out the tension from it. Take a nice deep breath. And then what you're going to do is you're going to do the opposite leg the same way. So go back down to the ground. Nice and gently. Keep your hands close to your feet. Bend and straighten your standing leg. Keep your foot flat on the floor. And if going to the ground is too difficult, you simply stay near the wall and you bend and straighten the standing leg. Simply make sure that all the weight is only on one leg. That will force all of those muscles in that leg to work a little bit harder than usual. Again, you're going to do this by coming up and down only as far as you can comfortably. You're going to work until you actually fatigue the leg muscles. And this will be a different number of times for different people. And once you fatigue those leg muscles, what you're going to do is come back up into a standing position. And then you're going to shake your legs out. At this point, shake out both legs. Take a nice deep breath. Sink down into your body and relax. For this next exercise, what we're going to do is we're going to actually stretch the legs because we've been working them. And we want to pull a nice stretch into the legs because eventually we're trying to get into the pelvis. What happens is that all of the leg muscle groups in the top of the leg actually restrict the pelvis from moving freely. So for this exercise, we want to start pulling out these muscles so they can stretch. And we have to do this slowly because the muscles can't stretch quickly. The way we're going to do this is we're going to spread our legs as far apart as we need to get a stretch on the inner thigh muscles. Keep your feet pointed forward. Keep a slight bend in your knees. Don't lock them. Then what you're going to do is you're going to actually simply go down to the ground and put your hands on the ground. You're going to rest in that position, drop your head so that there's no tension in your neck, and take 3 slow, deep breaths. Then you're going to walk your hands over to one foot, nice and easily, as far as you can, without pulling a stretch too tight. Hold this position for 3 slow, deep breaths. Then walk your hands over to the other foot and do the same thing. Hold the position for 3 slow breaths. The only reason we're doing this is to give the muscles time to stretch nice and gently. Now you're going to walk your hands back to the middle and through your legs behind you. Keep your knees slightly bent. Hold that position for 3 breaths. This will help bring a nice stretch into the hamstrings, and you might begin to feel some tremors coming into your legs in this position. If you feel the tremors and you're comfortable with them, just let your body tremor because that's the end result for these exercises. So very slowly come back up into a standing position, keeping your legs where they are. For the second part of this exercise routine, what you want to do is put your hands on your lower back to provide some support. Then what you're going to do is gently bow your body so that your pelvis comes forward and you have a gentle stretch in your back, not a heavy one. You can let your head rest backwards if that's comfortable for you, or you can hold your head up if that's comfortable for you. Take 3 slow, deep breaths in this position. Don't stretch so far in your back that you're starting to strain it. That's absolutely unnecessary. After you've taken 3 slow breaths, what you want to do is twist from your hips not your shoulders. Twist from your hips and turn and look behind you so that you have both a bow in the back and a twist. Hold that for 3 slow breaths. And then you're going to twist in the opposite direction. Twist from your hips. You're going to hold that for 3 breaths. And you might begin to feel the tremors coming into your body from this position. As long as you feel comfortable with them, you allow the tremors to continue to happen. Then you come back to the front again. Hold that one more time for 3 slow breaths. You have a nice gentle bow in the body. Then you gently come out of the bow. You walk your feet back together again and shake your legs out. And now you've completed the next exercise. I'm going to have you go ahead and go to the wall, and you're going to lean your backs against the wall. Then what you're going to do is you're going to actually pull your feet out from the wall and go down into a sitting position. What you want to make sure, first of all, is that your knees are not further out than your feet, because the pressure will go into your knees. You want to make sure your feet come out further, and that way the pressure goes into the floor. Also make sure, whatever type of flooring you have, that you don't slip. This could be the most dangerous piece. You want to make sure that you simply have a good grasp on the floor. So you can come down at different angles. You can come down to a deep angle like this, but it's not necessary. But if you're a runner or a biker or a jogger, you might have very strong quadricep muscles. If that's the case, you may need to come down this deep to challenge those muscles. Okay? We're not looking to create pain here. We're actually simply looking to stress the muscles. So what you're going to do is you're going to stay in this position. You're simply going to relax there. Your feet are shoulder width apart. If this position gets painful, and it will after a little while, then I want you to just come up the wall a little bit, which we'll see in a few minutes. What may start to happen in this position is you might begin to see some mild tremoring come into the legs. As long as you're comfortable with the tremors, you can continue to tremor because that's the goal of the exercises. If they feel uncomfortable for you, for whatever reason, you want to come out of them. But as long as you feel comfortable with the tremors, you just stay there and actually just observe your body as it begins to tremor. You might begin to feel some bouncing that comes into your body. And when you feel this, it's energy starting to move in the body. You can actually come up the wall a little bit and reduce the stress. The tremors will still continue to come, and you simply stay there and relax with them. Take a nice deep breath. Just let go into your body. Okay, we're in 1 minute. Now when you stay on the wall, you're going to begin to feel different types of tremors coming in. They might be very mild and gentle. They could feel like they're deep inside the body, or they could feel like they're on the surface where you see lots of movement, or they could start pushing you up the wall, causing you to bounce. Any one of those are perfect expressions of the tremors. At this point, you're allowing the body to guide you through the tremors, and you're not leading the tremors to go anywhere. Take another deep breath, everybody. Just relax onto the wall. You're all doing fine. You might begin to feel the tremors actually spreading through the body. So they might start in one set of muscles in the leg, then you'll start feeling them in a different set of leg muscles, or you could even feel them starting to come up through your pelvis, into your hips and your lower back. Some people experience them already starting to come into their belly. That's all okay. The longer you stay on the wall, the more the tremors will have an opportunity to activate, which is preparation for the next exercise after this one. However, you don't want to stay on the wall and exhaust yourself. You simply want to do it for enough time that you actually feel yourself allowing the tremors to start to move through the body. You shouldn't be experiencing pain. If you experience pain, come up the wall a little bit further. Inevitably, what we're looking for is we're looking for a place where we're getting tremors on the wall and we don't have any pain in our legs. Take another deep breath. Just let yourself relax. Throughout this process, which takes sometimes about 5 minutes, maybe a little longer even, what you want to do is make sure you keep taking a nice deep breath occasionally and letting it out with sound. You'll often find that making sound in the exercise will actually increase the tremors. If you get very strong bouncing in the tremors, as long as they're not disturbing for you, they're fine. It's simply a matter of the energy moving through the body, and it's moving through certain muscles to actually try to extend itself throughout the body. So here you can see some pretty strong tremors coming into the body, and they've come into the lower back. That's the reason that she's starting to get pushed up the wall here. So you want to allow that just to happen. It's not anything that's disturbing. The body actually finds it comforting and soothing. And then what you see here is you see some tremors coming deep into the pelvis and into the legs, and even going down into the calf muscles. What's happening here is that the tremors are actually going deep inside the body, and they're actually releasing a lot of the tight muscle tissue, because you can see that his muscle tone is very dense. And so he's having an experience where it's just going right through the legs at a very deep level and releasing deep chronic tension in the pelvis and legs. And over here, you can see that there's really subtle vibration happening, and it's going on quite deep inside the body. It's actually starting to move up the body here. You can see it in the hips and in the pelvic area, and you can see it starting to even move her hips off the wall. All three of these are just fine. All of them are simple expressions of the way different people get tremors in their bodies. After you've gotten a fair amount of tremors in your body, what you're going to do is you're actually going to come up off the wall and you're going to hang over forward. You keep your feet shoulder width apart, bring your hands close down to your feet, and keep your knees slightly bent. What's going to happen is you're still going to feel the tremors going through the legs. All you've done is added a stretch to the hamstring muscles, and you're inviting them into the ability to tremor. So when you hang over forward, you'll actually be able to feel the tremors continuing in the legs. And the reason for this is because you've added the hamstring stretch into the tremoring exercises. As long as you feel comfortable with them, let them continue to tremor. You only have to stay in this position for about 1 minute. You simply let your legs tremor, and then you gently come back into a standing position. And then you shake your legs out and take a nice deep breath and just relax. For the final exercise, what you want to do is you want to find a nice comfortable place where you're sitting on the floor. What you're going to do is simply lay down on your backs on the floor in a relaxed position. And you're going to put the bottoms of your feet together. You're going to let your knees fall open naturally and just rest there. Your hands could be on your side, they could be sitting on your pelvis or belly, or they could be up by your head. It doesn't matter. What you're going to do is bring your feet as close to the pelvic floor as you comfortably can. And when you feel ready, you're actually going to pick your pelvis up off the ground. You're going to keep your knees open. And you have a double stretch. You're stretching the adductor muscles, which are the inner part of the thigh, and you're stretching your psoas muscle, which runs from the legs through the pelvis and connects into the lower base of the spine. Now in this position, you don't have to lift your pelvis up very high. You just hold it there. If this is painful, you just pick your pelvis up for 2 seconds and you can set it back down. As long as it's not painful, you can continue to hold your pelvis up. If it becomes tiring, you also don't want to hold your pelvis up too long. You just simply set it back down and you take a rest. Then you can always pick it back up. If this is too painful for you to even do this, don't even lift your pelvis up off the ground. You're simply going to lay there with your knees open. Now, when your pelvis is up, there are some interesting things that may begin to happen to you. What you're going to do is possibly see something like getting some bouncing happening in the pelvis. The bouncing is quite natural. As long as it doesn't feel disturbing for you, you simply just let your body bounce like this. You take a few deep breaths, you relax into the position, and at this point, your body is having an autonomic reaction. It's doing something all by itself. All we want to do is follow what the body is presenting to us. The first time you do this exercise, you may need to keep your pelvis up off the ground for about a minute and a half, for you to be able to activate the tremors in this position. Remember, it's a matter of waiting for the body to begin to engage itself. It's not about us doing anything. And so when we're working with a living organism, we have to be patient and we have to let this simply happen to our bodies. Now, the way this normally begins in the body is you begin to see some very mild tremors starting to happen. And you can see some mild tremors happening right here. They're very subtle, they're very gentle. What's happening here is the body is slowly starting to move the tremors from the legs into the psoas muscle that runs through the pelvis. When that happens, you can start to see the shaking or the bouncing. Don't worry whether this is strong or mild, it doesn't matter, because your body will do it the way that it needs to get the tremoring. And you can begin to see some more tremoring over here. And again, his tremoring tends to be deep inside the body. You may not see it so obviously on the surface, but you can see that he's getting deep tremors that are actually moving his legs as well as his pelvis into a really tremored position deep inside. Once you see tremoring or you're experiencing tremoring like this in your body, now you know you've started to move some of the stuck energy in the muscle tissue, and so you can actually set your pelvis down on the floor and let it just relax. When you set your pelvis down, let it relax on the floor, let your knees just rest open. At this point, you can actually move your feet a little bit further away from the pelvic floor because you don't need such a deep bend in your knees. Now, what you want to do for the first part of the exercise is you want to close your knees just a tiny little bit, not much, and you want to hold that position. And what you're going to do is begin to feel some vibration coming into your body. When that happens, you just allow it to happen as long as it isn't disturbing. Take a nice deep breath and let yourself relax onto the floor. You may experience the tremoring as it comes and goes through the body. Now, some interesting things to note about these tremors. You can see some tremors like this, which are actually whole body tremors. You can see it's actually creating a wave that's generating movement all the ways up the body. You can see the pulsating movement coming in from the diaphragm, and she's simply laying here breathing. The body has started to take over. The natural course of these tremors is to travel from the legs into the psoas muscle, which is located in the pelvis. Then what they'll do is naturally start traveling up the spinal column. And of course, it's going to start to make the spinal column move in a type of wave. And that's all that we're seeing here. She's relaxing. She's not doing anything. She's just giving into her body and letting the waves move through the body. Okay? Now, another type of tremors you can get, you can see they're very soft and gentle coming in the legs, but she's also getting some movement in her hands. And so I know that the energy has already started coming up through the torso, and it's starting to come out the arm. That's a natural course that it could do as well. You simply let it come into your hands, let your hands move and tremor, and that's fine. Her legs are moving back and forth, which is telling me the adductor muscles are starting to release the tension. And she has some energy that's starting to move through her pelvis. All you have to do, again, is simply follow the course of the tremors. If at any point you feel uncomfortable, either psychologically, emotionally, or physically, simply stop the exercise. Come out of the position. Now, we also have some tremors here, which you can see are two types of tremors happening at the same time. He's getting tremors in his legs, which are very easy to see, and he's also getting tremoring in his hips. So you can see his hips begin to move a little bit, and the tremor is pretty deep inside his body. So you have three different examples of many different types of ways that your body may end up tremoring. Your body will actually tremor according to the muscle tension patterns that you have from the life that you've lived. So there is no correct or incorrect way to do this. It's simply about following the body. It will tremor the way it needs to release the chronic tension in the muscle tissue. After you've stayed like this for about 1 minute, what you'll do is you'll close your knees again just another inch. And when you do that, you can see that the tremors will probably begin to get a little bit stronger. That's because you've relaxed the muscle tissue, you've allowed the tremors to start to move through the body, and each time you close your knees, you actually provide a more clear pathway for the tremors and the energy of the tremors to start passing through the body. So here you can see they're starting to come into his lower back because we can see his belly and his hips starting to move. So you just let it happen, and we're going to just keep letting the tremors increase. You're going to take a nice deep breath, let it out with sound. That's it, you guys. Just relax. Just give in to the tremors. You all look great and you're doing fine. Now after you've stayed like this for about a minute, you're going to again close your knees about 1 more inch. And some interesting things may begin to happen again. So what you can see here is you can see a really strong movement starting to happen in the legs, that they're closing back and forth very quickly and very strongly. All that means is that there's a lot of tension in the adductor muscles on the inner thigh, and it's starting to release. As she brought her legs closer, the adductor muscles could relax a little bit more and release more tension. So you see not only the tension in the legs starting to release by this movement, but you actually see some hand movements starting to get stronger as well. And all that simply means is that the energy is able to travel up the spine, through the torso. You can even begin to see her torso starting to move, and that's simply discharging the stress and tension that we naturally tend to hold in our bodies. Okay, gang, take another nice deep breath. Let it out with sound. Oh. After you've stayed like this for about 5 minutes, or longer as long as you feel comfortable, what you want to do is you want to actually turn the bottoms of your feet so that they're flat on the floor and move them a little bit apart from each other. You want to make sure your knees are wider apart than your feet. The tremoring may actually increase in this position. And once again, as long as you feel comfortable with it, you're simply going to allow it to happen. Take a nice deep breath and let out it with sound. Now another thing that you could notice as the tremors progress, and you can see what happened here, she was getting tremors only in her right hand at the beginning. But now the tremors have moved not only into her left hand, but you can actually see the movement happening in the biceps and the triceps of her arms. So now I can see she's getting a fuller expression of release that's happening from the pelvis and legs, coming through the torso, and you can actually see it coming out her arms and hands. Because we tend to hold a lot of tension in our arms and hands as well. So it would be natural that as the body has the opportunity to release this, it's actually going to find the places where we have the most tension and try to get rid of it. For the body as a living organism, getting rid of this deep chronic tension actually is bringing it back to its healthiest state. And as a living organism, our bodies are always trying to seek their healthiest state. In this way, they're using a natural tremoring mechanism which is already in the body to actually bring about that healthy state of relaxation. That's a deep breath and let it out with sound. Okay, we're going to stay like this for about 15 more seconds. Now, to complete this exercise, which you can do at any time throughout the exercise, all you want to do is let your legs slide flat onto the floor directly in front of you. Just let them slide down and let yourself rest on your back. Take a deep breath and let it out with sound. And you want to rest in this position for about a minute and just notice how you feel in your body. You may have some residual tremors that continue even in the resting position, and that's just fine. It's the body simply calming itself down. To come out of the rest position, you do not want to do a sit-up, because if you do, you'll contract the muscles along the spinal column that you just relaxed. So the best way to come out of this position is to roll over to your left side and then push yourself up with your hands into a sitting position. Then you come back to a sitting position. Notice how you feel in your body. Make sure you can reorient yourself, because the tremors had a very powerful effect on your bodies. And then when you're ready, you can actually come up into a very gentle standing position. Come on up. Then what you want to do is you want to shake your legs out. And you've successfully completed this series of exercises.
Until I met David, and until I started his program, and then came here today, I felt like I couldn't cry. And I couldn't laugh. And the most unique experiences for me were the tears when my child was first born, and the laughter that I experienced when my granddaughter goes down the slide. From her, not from me. But I think now I can start to build on having my own laughter and my own tears without fear.
I realize now when the pain stopped in my body, when I was really aware of relief from the pain I've been experiencing, was when we went to the wall. And I was only on the wall for a few seconds, and I wanted to say, the pain's gone.
She said she got more tremors on the wall, and they came all the ways up her body. If that's the case, that's actually where you would stay. You don't have to come to the floor. We just did a complete set of exercises. If you get better tremors on the wall, it's just the body saying, this is where I release best, in this position and with this muscle pattern stressed. So you follow it, okay?
I just love laughing, laughing uncontrollably. And there was, you know, it's always, you're just always used to a stimulus that somebody says something funny, but it's funny that it came from my body moving. And I felt so silly, like I didn't want to stop, and I was trying to contain it, and it was really nice being coached to say, let it just release, let it release, but then there was something wanting me to stop it, and I couldn't stop it. I just couldn't stop laughing. It was really, I haven't experienced that.
The other thing is that she said, well, she only got it up to about here, okay? That's what the laughter was about. It was about releasing the diaphragm so that it could come up further, okay? Because it was stuck, and it was stuck in the diaphragm. The diaphragm is a horizontal muscle, so energy trying to move this way can't get through it, okay? And so I laughed spontaneously. I don't know why. And that's because the body was doing it. It wasn't you weren't being evoked by something cognitively. The body was saying, I can't release unless I release diaphragm. And what's the easiest way to do it? Either cry or laugh. And that's simply diaphragm release, and the body doesn't care which it is, it just needs to do it. Okay? And so, so my whole thing about you can't do it wrong is exactly right. The body knew what it was trying to do. So there's absolutely no way to do this wrong if the tremors are in control, because they're constantly evoking what they need to actually spread further in the body. Okay? So that's why you could have an emotion, it could be happy, it could be sad, it could be angry. None of that matters because it's nothing but energy trying to find the way through the blockage. That's it. So you literally can't do it wrong if you just lay there. Whatever comes is coming because the organism needs a reason to produce it.
When you started laughing, my stomach started going, and it never does that. It never laughs like that. But it was like it was just jumping up and down and saying, that was really funny. And what you were saying wasn't really funny. It was, you know, it was just making something in me laugh.
So he talks about, and this happens all the time, one organism starts to pulsate in a certain way that another organism needs to do, and it begins to follow the pulsation. I have been in a room where one person laughed and the entire room ended up in hysterical laughter that they couldn't control. I've also been in a room where one person cries, deep belly cry, and the whole room follows that movement. There is a certain place where our individual organisms vibrating actually build a collective vibratory rate in the room, which we were almost getting to actually. We had to quit, but I could feel the sense of, instead of individual pulsations going on, it was one vibratory rate trying to resonate throughout the room, which is what this laughter was beginning to try to build. It was starting with some crying that had begun earlier, but because crying is a more socially intimate emotion to release, we couldn't let that release become deep enough, okay? But this is very common if you're going to be doing this with groups, to actually see a whole room begin to vibrate at the same rate. He also talks about when your belly started to move, his belly started to move, okay? So the organisms are responding in the same way, and he says, I wanted it to happen because it was only coming up and through here. What it was doing was coming up the deepest part it could, following the spinal column, and coming out here. Eventually, it's going to actually spread as it is able to move through the other muscles that were probably a little bit tighter and too difficult to move through, okay? But it will do that. The wonderful thing about these tremors is that the amount of tension you've released just now today no longer exists in the body. So if you actually go home tonight and do the exercises again, you'll start exactly where you left off, because you can't go back to a starting point that no longer exists. And that's how the tremors become progressive in the body, to the point where they actually restore the organism back to its natural state, as much as that is possible for us, but it actually has its own progressive quality to it. So you will get it to come out your shoulders and your lats, and it will obviously do that because the body now has already a free avenue. It doesn't have to work to release this, it already just did it. So if he goes back and he starts there, this is already released, so the energy comes up faster and stronger and now can push its way into the tighter muscles.
I've been shaking for several months now, and I've come to understand that, for me anyway, my shaking is about having a massage from the inside out. It's, for me, probably the cheapest massage you can have, because I get more relaxation, more release. I feel that my pain dissipates much more quickly than anything that I can get from a 1-hour professional massage. And I think that's absolutely incredible, and a real testimony to this particular technique, because it really helps me sleep, and if I'm worked up about something, I know I can go and release that. And I guess for me it is a real shortcut to well-being.
When we got down onto the floor, I went through a process of, as we closed our legs, the first time it was just from my waist down. when I moved my legs again, it was just from the waist up. And then the third time we did it, it was just all over. I was going. It was moving through me. And then after, when we came to the place of stopping, it was this super fine vibration. It was like a tremoring, but it was just so super fine. My body wasn't moving, nothing was happening, but I could feel it right from the top of my head all the way through me, of just this, okay, we're in a new place now, something's gone, and I'm vibrating differently than when I walked into the room.
What I really believe happens at a much deeper level than the releasing of tension in the body is we're actually looking for the vibratory rate, the natural vibratory rate of this organism, which we know it does exist. And what happens is when you actually get rid of the obstructions in the bigger muscle columns, what you'll find is what you talked about, this, it almost feels like an electric current. It's like vibration, but electricity. And she's actually feeling what we should all feel naturally every day of our life. We should actually feel that refined, energetic course or source inside of us, and that's where matter and energy are dialoguing, where we actually become a little bit of both. We feel ourselves as matter, and so we say it was kind of like vibration, but it wasn't exactly vibration because it was like electric current as well. And that is that fine negotiated stage that we ultimately look for. And that to me is the place where we actually reach the sense of self that's deep enough to be expansive and feel the collectiveness of us. Because we're all vibrating at that rate. It's just been distorted or hidden, and we just can't simply feel it yet.
I tend to be kind of interested because I'm very analytical, is that she's tremoring from the bottom. I tend to tremor from the top up. My head bangs against the wall or against the floor. And of course I'm thinking, well, it's just our different histories. Is that correct? And is that a correct assumption? So as your body starts to create these different waves of release through the body, it's just a matter of compounding it over time and letting the body learn how to release it through the rest of the body. Is that the idea?
Yeah. When you tell me that your body releases from about the neck up or the shoulders up, well, what that does is simply tell me where can she get the discharge, and quite honestly, where do you need it most? You probably have pretty strong neck and shoulder pain, and so, or tension. And so with strong neck and shoulder tension, the body's got to release that so that it can, in a sense, take this amount of tension and bring it down to this amount of tension so they can now communicate, meaning through the organism from the pelvis up to the base of the skull. And so it starts where it needs to be able to bring the body back into balance. And that's why each person will start in a different place to get the tremors and have them move in different ways inside the body, because all it's doing is looking to reestablish the homeostasis throughout the entire organism.
Hi, my name's Vim, and I live on Vancouver Island. That's on the west coast of Canada. And I'm nearly 60 years old, and I've spent basically a lifetime trying to free myself of a burden, and this burden is a burden that I wasn't ever really happy. I wasn't feeling well. I just didn't enjoy life. And I spent many hours, much money, and a long search doing different therapies and trying to reconnect, and each one helped to a degree of reconnecting with, I guess, myself. And then one day I was down in Scottsdale, Arizona, and someone showed me these exercises that induce these tremors that help release stuff. So once I did them once, and I was so excited. I did them for about 3 months straight, and I've accessed such deep and profound places in me, and released stuff. That's the best I can put it. I've released stuff, and I've basically reconnected with who I was, and I've reconnected with that person, and I'm now experiencing the happiest times of my life. And why I'm making this little testimonial is that I really, really endorse this, and I encourage anybody who wants to release stuff that they don't know what it is to do these exercises, because it's been just the thrill of my life doing them.
For about a year now, I've had the wonderful privilege of working with Dr. David Berceli towards the production of a new Namaste publishing book. So I'm delighted to introduce you to the Namaste audience today, David.
Thank you, David.
And we're talking about your new book, which is the revolutionary trauma release process. So I want to begin by asking you, first of all, what is trauma?
Good, that's a good question, because trauma is generally misunderstood. It's actually more common than what we usually understand that term to be. And here are examples of trauma. Something like a hard trauma would be something like a hurricane or a tornado, or some experience like a car accident, where people actually have a certain date and time when they experienced an event that was very overwhelming for them. And that overwhelming event caused them to feel really disturbed inside. That's very common to have experiences like that you can point them out. But what's even more interesting are what we call soft traumas. And soft traumas would be events where people actually maybe grow up in a dysfunctional environment. They grow up as inner city youth, as an example, where they could be exposed to violence on a regular basis and not even recognizing that it's traumatizing them.
Bullying on the school playground?
Well, the playground could very much be very traumatizing, because many adults carry that much into their adult life and end up changing their personalities and their behavior patterns as a result of those experiences. Another example would be simply growing up in dysfunctional families where you might have an alcoholic parent, and you learn to live in a very type of behavior that causes you to be secretive or quiet or even diminishing of yourself so as not to be seen in that environment. And then you continue to repeat that experience even after you've left the home. Those are considered traumatizing events, which by and large, many people on this planet experience on a rather continual basis.
Now, when you talk about trauma release, why would one need to release trauma? Isn't it over and done with at the time it happens?
Well, many people actually used to believe that once the traumatic event was over, that you would actually be able to return or restore yourself back to normal. But it's very much a misnomer, because once you have a traumatic event, what initially will happen is the body will begin to change its behavior pattern. It'll create certain chemicals, it'll create certain muscle tension patterns. When it creates those patterns, it actually begins to store those patterns in memory. And the reason it's going to store it in your memory system is because it's going to continue to use those patterns later on. So that after a traumatic event is over, many people by and large continue to hold on to both the trauma pattern in the body as well as the trauma pattern in the brain, just in case you're going to be traumatized again, and the body will be able to deal with that second traumatic event.
And you've talked about in your book that actually this trauma is etched like a chronological history, that it's in fact the most true record we have of what really happened to us in our lives. Not what we think or what our emotions may say, but our body. You want to explain that a little more for us?
It's very simple to understand if you understand that the body can only live in the present moment. However, the brain can live in both the past and in the future. And because of that, it can actually create experiences or even create anxiety about the future that it's not even going through at the present moment. The body, however, can only stay in the present moment. And because of that reason, it only records exactly what is happening to it. As it records that, it actually stores that in the muscle tissue and actually replicates or holds in it, like a history book, all that it's been through in life.
How on earth did you discover that this is what was happening to in our bodies when we went through trauma. And then, even more amazing, how did you discover that there was a way to actually erase that history and let it go?
Well, I had the opportunity to actually live in a number of war-torn countries in both Africa and the Middle East for a number of years. And in that experience, I actually saw tens of thousands of traumatized people. So what I was doing was actually noticing without seeing at first identical patterns in these people that were experiencing different types of trauma.
Can you think of when you first noticed this? What came to you?
When I first noticed it was when I was sitting in a building in Lebanon, and the building was being bombed by mortar shells. What happened at that time was we were living in the basement, and every time a mortar shell would hit the building, all of us, and there were 8 of us in the room, would end up contracting very quickly and very tightly into a certain position, which was basically pulling our head down into our neck and shoulders and then curling forward slightly. It was just like a jerking reaction. We did this many times throughout the day of this intense bombing, and what I realized was that every one of us, even though we were from 6 different countries and there were 8 of us there, every one of us did exactly the same motion in exactly the same way. What struck me about that was how did we all know how to perform that behavior pattern? And it was the first time it had dawned on me that all of us had some mechanism built into us that we could actually repeat this pattern in an identical manner, not even knowing that we did it, and then actually store that memory so that we did it every single time a mortar shell would hit the building.
We see it in our own everyday lives, don't we? We have these reactions where we cringe or where we hold our breath, and so this is all registered in our muscles?
Yes, all of that actually gets registered in the muscles because it's guaranteed to help us survive later on so that I don't have to relearn that lesson. If I had to learn how to make that same pattern every single time I experienced a bomb, I would have a greater opportunity of actually being killed. If I learn to memorize that pattern, which I do instinctively, then I actually can recall that memory and restore that pattern every single time I hear a shocking sound to guarantee that I know how to make the exact position I need to make to protect myself.
So now you saw people all following these same patterns. Where'd you go from there?
Well, there was another pattern that I began to see was that a lot of people who are living in these intense environments, and although I was living in war, it would be no different than living in inner city environments where they're highly stressful, or living in environments of dysfunctional family behaviors, because what happens is the body begins to slowly actually contract forward in a chronic stance. And so you could see this very easily. If you chastise a child, and you'll actually see that child begin to slump forward like this. And if you do that over years, that child will actually learn how to live in a slumped position. But the minute you begin to encourage that child and enliven that child with compliments, that contracted position begins to let go, and the child comes back up, and the head raises up again, the shoulders pull back, the diaphragm opens up, and they take deep breathing. So we can actually cause the organism to both contract in a defensive pattern and live in that position, or actually help the organism move into an expanded position and live like that as well.
So here you were in a situation of observing this, noticing what's going on, what went on in your thinking, in your feelings, that led you to say there has to be a systematic way of releasing this trauma?
Well, what I began to recognize, and this was because I had been to several countries at war, so I got to see people in different countries successively after each other, traveling to different countries, and I saw exactly the same pattern, which really led me to a curiosity. And the curiosity was basically, how did all of us learn how to live in the same posture, even though we're from different cultures and we speak different languages, and we're from different countries, but yet we all had the same behavior when we were being traumatized. And I was curious about that behavior because I thought, if this is the movement forward, and I'm seeing this behavior or pattern of stance in every country, then there must be something common to the human organism or the human body that knows how to make that stance throughout the entire world, that we as humans know how to make exactly the same position to protect ourselves during traumatic events.
How does the trauma release process work exactly?
Well, this is another story because I discovered how it works, or how the trauma begins to release itself from the body, from having been in a country one time where we were experiencing aerial bombing. And what the job of the adults was at that time was to grab as many kids as we could, and we would all run to the bomb shelter. And we'd sit in the bomb shelter, and the adults would have children. And so I had 2 children sitting on each of my legs, and I was holding on to these kids. They were about 2 years old. And while I was holding these children, they were actually just tremoring, much as we experience tremors in various reasons. And exactly, we shake when we're frightened about something. So these children were tremoring. What I realized and asked questions about later was I wanted to know why the children tremored and the adults didn't tremor. So I began to ask the adults about this tremoring. And what I did was I asked them in a private sort of way, because I didn't want to embarrass them, did they feel like they wanted to tremor or shake the way I experienced that the children were shaking? And they admitted that they wanted to, but somehow adults learned how to control the tremoring response. But they would still tremor if they had the opportunity to do it.
Now, I'm thinking of a thunderstorm and my Norwegian elk hound. She'll come near me and she shakes. Is there a connection?
There's a direct connection because, quite frankly, most mammals shake when they are feeling overwhelmed by some experience, usually frightened by it. And so we belong to the mammal species, and we in fact shake as well. Now in humans, what we do, and this is how we have it in our lives, and we were just having dinner last night, and someone had said, I was shaking like a leaf. Okay? We have that phrase in our culture, so we know what shaking's like. Many of us experience shaking in our jaw when we get nervous. Our jaw might shake, and we say, my teeth were chattering, or my knees were knocking. Or after a car accident, you could be so disturbed, even if it wasn't severe, and you could find your hand tremoring. Or some people say, I was shaking all over my body and I couldn't stop it. Even for happy occasions, such as a marriage, you could be standing at the altar, you could be very happy, but your hand is still shaking. And the reason for that is because the body organically tremors. It knows how to do it. It has mechanisms to perform this tremoring, only for the very purpose of reducing high stress levels in the body, so that when we get overstressed, either for positive or negative experiences, we organically will begin to tremor if we allow ourselves to do it, which is the body restoring its natural homeostasis.
What's happening then in the body? What's the mechanism? Is this our muscles? Is this what is exactly the tremoring doing?
We have actually some mechanisms built right into the muscles. And these mechanisms in the muscle are designed that when the muscle begins to get too tight, even when you're doing physical exercise, you can feel that happening. If the muscle gets too tight and too stressed, it'll actually begin to tremor or shake. A lot of yoga practitioners will experience that when they hold a certain pose for a long period of time. They'll feel their body start to tremor. All the body is doing is saying, I'm so tight and I'm so tense that I have to release this charge, because if I don't, then I'm going to have to clamp onto it and actually create a chronic tension pattern. So what it does is begin to organically shake, and when it does that, it actually begins to release the tension in the muscle tissue.
So this is kind of like when I've watched on a lake, just in fact a few weeks ago, a couple of ducks have a bit of an altercation over whose territory this is, and then when they swim away from it, they flap and release the energy.
Oh yeah, this is very common. In most mammal species, you can see this quite common. Mammals in the wild, if a gazelle is being chased by a lion, that gazelle, as it gets away from the lion and it's finally safe, it escapes the lion, it will go over to the watering hole and just tremor all over. Much like if you've ever seen a horse fall, and when it gets back up, you actually see this refined tremor going through the entire horse, and all that's doing is actually, in a sense, turning off their fight or flight mechanism and actually calming the organism back down, and then it restores it back to its natural homeostasis. The horse feels calm and relaxed, and it just goes on with life again.
Now, you told me, and I can't remember whether you were coming back from a Middle Eastern country or whether it was Africa, but you told me that when you came back to this country, you had actually been so traumatized that you went in a grocery store, and I think your sister, you want to tell that story for us?
I've been in and out of trauma many times, and so I know when I come back to the United States, I'm traumatized, and I know that I have to relieve this. And the trauma means that I'm really very tight, very tense, and very alert. I'm actually hyper alert and hypersensitive. So it's difficult for me to be in crowds. It's difficult for me to hear loud noises. And those are all signs of being traumatized. So one time I came back and I actually went simply into a department store. And I went into the department store and already it became crowded for me and it became disturbing because now I can't control the environment. Which is very common for traumatized people to need to control the environment.
People coming back from Iraq with the war in Afghanistan.
Any type of war or type of violence that people have been in for a long time, even natural disasters, the desperate attempt to regain control is part of the traumatic process that they have to recover from. Because trauma basically is something that's so severely out of control, it actually feels endangering. And so people want to go back into control again. So what happens when I walk into a department store is everything seems to be out of control because I can't control the movement of people, the sounds that I hear, etc. And I saw some people that were having common everyday experiences, waiting in line and talking and being angry at their children and all this stuff. And it was so overwhelming for me that I actually started to just say to her, we have to get out of here, we have to get out of here. And I actually had to go out of the department store. And this is not an uncommon experience for many people who have experienced a lot of trauma.
Now, we're talking about something that I saw a lot of because I was in the New Orleans area when it struck. And that is post-traumatic stress disorder. What is it?
Post-traumatic stress disorder is very common, actually, and it's the process of having had a traumatic experience in your life, and you continue the behavior pattern that was created during the time of the traumatic experience, and so it literally is post-traumatic stress. It's behaving in a certain manner as though the trauma were still happening, and you're using the mechanisms for survival, but you no longer need them because the trauma is actually over. But you still have post-trauma stress reactions.
How does that get stuck in us in that way?
Well, it stays stuck because when we're traumatized, the body and the mind register these and actually remember. They record them. Because the body is designed simply to survive for as long as it can on the planet. So when it has some traumatic event, it wants to register, how did I save myself to survive that trauma? When it registers that, it allows it to be assured later on that if I ever experience another situation like this, I actually remember how I'm supposed to behave. Now that's very good for the time of the traumatic event. It's also very good if you find yourself in another trauma later on. What isn't good about it is that the body, depending on how long and how severe that trauma has been, will continue to use that pattern of trauma survival even when you're not in a traumatic situation any longer.
And so you have developed exercises that will enable someone such as a firefighter in 9/11 or an emergency responder of some form who was traumatized by going into that building or seeing so many people die, or people who are coming back from a war zone. You have some exercises that will enable them to become free of this PTSD?
Well, what I began to realize, once I discovered the chronic tension pattern in the body, I explored the series of muscles that are running along the front of the spine that actually help to create this chronic tension pattern that helps protect us during trauma. My theory was, if I know what muscles are chronically contracted, wouldn't there be a way to do some type of exercise or stretching that would actually pull that tension back out of the muscle tissue, and therefore shouldn't it theoretically help relieve the person from the chronic stress that they're experiencing from the traumatic event? And so I designed a series of exercises specifically around those muscles that are created, that create contraction during the traumatic event.
Is there a link between the kind of emotions that occurred at the time the person's body became tense and then when they do the exercises to release these? Is there a connection there between them?
Essentially what happens is that every person in a traumatic event might experience a whole different series of emotions, and it could be from the same trauma. We would just have different emotional expressions from that. So what will happen is, as I'm releasing the chronic tension patterns in the body by doing the exercises, whatever emotions were generated for me during the time of the traumatic event will be different, but they will release as the types of emotions that you generated during that traumatic event will release. And so that's the uniqueness again of each of our bodies. I will hold in a history both the emotions that I experienced, the chronic tension that I experienced, and the memory that I restored for myself during that traumatic event. And even though we're in the same trauma, those might be completely different for both of us.
So my muscles might shake, my body might twist in a different way from someone else's.
Right. Each body will twist and shake uniquely according to how their body needs to rid itself of the tension pattern that it created during the traumatic event.
Now, if you're releasing all of this trauma, is there any kind of danger to that? Is it safe? I mean, can anyone do this? Do you need a therapist to do this with? What if you live in the middle of Africa and there's no therapist or anyone around? I mean, can a person do this there?
In general, these exercises are extremely safe, mostly because they're nothing but the body using its own mechanisms to come back to life. I'm not intervening or touching the body in any way. The exercises can be done by yourself, and your body simply will respond to them, and it does so quite naturally. However, there are some people who have had very severe traumatic experiences in life, and as their body begins to release the contraction from those severe experiences, they might in fact get extremely frightened by that experience. It's not that the tremors are producing fear, it's just that the fear was so intense during the time of the traumatic event, and the body is ready to release it, but the ego, if you will, or the emotions in the body are so strong they actually feel them overpowering. And in that sense, people absolutely should see a professional to actually guide them through not the experiences of the tremors that are quite safe, but the experiences of the discharge of the deep emotional release, because many times they might need to integrate that. If it's a deep emotion, I might need to tell you the story or have you actually see it so that you actually witness my recovery process.
How often should a person do these exercises? And also I noticed that when I look at some of the exercises, they can seem a little complex in a way, and yet each one's quite simple. Do you have to do them all? Do you do them every day? How does that work?
The exercises, although I designed them in a series, and I designed them in a series because I tried to get as generalized an exercise routine as I could to try to make sure every person can get the tremors. So they're actually simple and quite unassuming, and when you first do them you would think, well, there's not going to be much that's going to come from this until you start moving further into the exercises. And anybody can do them from 7 years old up to 87 years old, doesn't matter, because you can always do the exercises in a way that you can do them that's sensitive to your body and your body's abilities to perform the exercises. So they're safe to do, they're actually easy to do. The only difference is that if we have different types of tension patterns in our bodies, when we lay on the floor, we're actually going to experience the tremors in a different way. Some may be stronger and some may be milder. Some may come further up the body and some may not go as far up the body. Some may feel deep inside the muscle tissue and some will feel like it's on the surface of the muscle. Along with that is we may feel different emotions. Some people may have no emotional expression at all, no emotional release because they don't need it. Other people will have very deep emotional release, mostly because they haven't yet processed the emotions from the traumatic event that they experienced. And when the body starts to release that muscle pattern, the emotions are able to surface and pass through the body, which is actually what it's trying to do, is release anything that it no longer needs because it's preventing it from being in its healthiest state. Some people also might have intense memories about the traumatic experience because they may surface. Others may have no memory at all. Some people will lay on the floor and have tremors and simply laugh because they feel pleasurable, they feel relaxing, they feel extremely comfortable, and they'll get a good night's sleep. Others will simply lay there, have nothing except tremors, but feel them mildly pleasurable because the body actually feels very soothed by this tremoring process. And then others who actually should see a therapist to guide them through the exercises may have a very strong emotional release from these exercises.
When I think about the books that are produced, the DVDs, the CDs from Namaste Publishing, it's not just any book house. It's not like we have certain kinds of books and we just want to put out as many books. The books have been very carefully selected because they're all about presence. They're about being really here in this moment. They're about a spiritual journey, the experience of life in the full. Is there a spiritual element to all of this that you're talking about?
I love that question because I've seen this in many different cultures. If you could imagine, and we have this already known in our culture, and in many cultures it's quite unified, but we have a sort of a body, a mind, and some type of spiritual essence or energetic sense of ourselves that actually comes from that experience. What's interesting about these tremors is they're organically and naturally evoked within the body itself. There's nothing external that you need to do. And they're evoked from a memory of the body because it knows how to evoke these tremors. When the body begins to relax, what it really does is actually feel itself more deeply in the present moment. Because in chronic tension, the body actually is living from memory of either past experiences or future anticipations of fear. But when it's in its most relaxed state, it's actually living most deeply in the present moment. Now, all spiritual guides in every culture that I've experienced, every religion and every spiritual tradition tells you that for deep spirituality, you must live in the present moment. Well, because the body can only live in the present moment, and the tremors actually help to increase the sensation of being in the present moment, many people experience a sort of spiritual sort of overwhelming from this, or a deeper sense of deep spirituality. But not only with themselves or within themselves, but they actually then begin to feel what should be natural is a connection to something bigger than themselves. And so what I've experienced is that many people will try to describe that the tremoring response they're getting in their body seems to be the very place where the matter, or if you will, the tissue of the body meets the energetic core of the body, and there's this dialogue between being an individual and being connected to the collective. And that, for most people, ends up becoming defined as a deep spiritual experience.
Would it be true to say then that even though none of us want to invite hurricanes and cyclones and other terrible trauma or the awful poverty of some of the world and the disease into our lives, yet when these things happen, would it be true to say that they can actually become instruments of our spiritual growth?
That's a very complicated question. It's a perfect question to ask, and there are many people that will give you lots of different answers. First of all, we don't like trauma, and we don't like growing as a result of pain or painful experiences in life. No one likes it. We would all like to grow as a result of really positive and good experiences. But very few of us ever have lives like that. So here's really what happens. I want to take trauma out of the misnomer that we should try to protect ourselves from it for all of our lives. Because to me, there's a sense of running away or trying to protect yourself from something that may inevitably happen in the future. I'd rather make it more commonplace to say, if traumatic events occur to us, we are actually capable of experiencing the trauma, surviving the trauma, and what I believe even more so is actually learning from that traumatic event. And what I mean by that is through the whole evolution of every species, every living species on the planet, plants, animals, and humans, we have actually had many, many experiences of trauma over our collective lifespans. And so actually, the only species that are still alive on this planet today are those who have learned from their traumatic events, and from that learning actually have evolved. So we as a species, by virtue of the fact that we're still alive on the planet, actually demonstrate that the traumas that we have collectively had on this planet, which have been billions over the course of the lifetime of human history, we've actually learned from those, and we have evolved as a species as a result of that. So trauma actually has been part of our evolutionary process, and we've evolved not because we've had the trauma, not despite the trauma, but we've evolved because the trauma actually taught us something. And so trauma is quite commonplace and natural. And if we could take that up as a understandable and acceptable experience as humans and realize that the next traumatic event or the next stressful event we may find ourselves in, we actually know how to survive that. And not only survive it, but actually to evolve just a little bit more as a human species as a result of having gone through that traumatic experience.
I'd like to finish with a question that for me is a fascinating one, because I know that you spent some time in your life around Mother Teresa. And here is someone who saw a tremendous amount of trauma in people's lives. What did you learn from her about trauma?
Although I spent time with Mother Teresa, I began to see in her experiences of other people on this planet that are trying to teach us a new level of consciousness. And this is what I mean by that. If we took Mother Teresa and Nelson Mandela and Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King just as examples, they're historical figures on the planet. All of those historical figures experienced traumatic events in their lives, both personally and in what they were involved in trying to bring change in the world. What I began to realize is that those people went deeply into their traumatic experiences. And that's what made them different from us. We generally tend not to want to go into the pain of trauma. We'd like to run from it. We'd like to put trauma behind us. We'd like to hope that it didn't affect us deeply. But these people actually chose deliberately to go into the pain and suffering of the human condition and explore within that painful place some way of coming back out of it. And this is what happened. Mother Teresa went into the pain that she experienced, and in the process of the pain, she came out on the other side of that experience and brought this profound message, and she simply said, well, I know what we need to do on the planet. We need to simply love everybody as though we were loving Jesus. Now that was her phrase, but Gandhi came up with something similar. Gandhi goes into his painful experience. He's imprisoned. He not only suffers, but he sees his nation suffering, and he goes deeply into this suffering, explores what's in the suffering, comes out on the other side and says to us, nonviolence. That's the only way to respond. And we didn't even know how to act or respond to that statement. Nonviolence, it didn't make sense. But that statement of nonviolence, as simple as it was, came out of a profound depth of pain. When he said nonviolence and he began to enact that on the planet, he literally changed human consciousness. Nelson Mandela does the same thing for us. He goes into suffering, is imprisoned for 27 years, explores the pain of losing 27 years of his life to something he knew was right and true, and he comes out and he says to us, reconciliation. We must reconcile with the very people who inflicted the pain on us. Now that so shifts human consciousness, because most of us can't imagine ever having gone through those experiences and actually coming out with some profound message. What they demonstrate to us is that if you go into the suffering, somewhere hidden in that traumatic event, in the process of exploring the suffering, to come out on the other side, hidden in there is the shift of consciousness that we're trying to make as a human species, so that all of us will eventually come out on the other side of that pain, and all of us will have learned some profound lesson that we could no longer ever inflict pain on other human beings, because we realize that nobody wins if we ever continue to repeat the violence of inflicting pain because of our repeated traumatic experiences.
It's the birth of global love.
Yes, hopefully that's going to be the new place of human consciousness that we're striving to achieve right now on this planet. And if we can get people to go into the pain of their suffering, go into their body and explore it, which these tremors help the individual to do, maybe we could have mass recovery processes where we get not just unique individuals transforming or changing their consciousness, but we can get actually tens of thousands of people to actually have a transformed consciousness so that our new humanity can rebirth itself.
David, that's a wonderful insight. Thank you so much for this interview. We invite you to enjoy the exercises, to benefit from them, and a fuller explanation is found in the revolutionary trauma process, which is all about transcending your toughest times.
She slumbers quietly in an ancient mist. Memories of kinder days by sunlight kissed. Our flowers all in bloom and our music played. And in the darkness now you can hear her say, and it's still there, the magic's there.